In a world driven by cold decisions and untold sacrifices, Nathaniel Bishop had always kept his emotions locked away. But when a seemingly innocuous visit to an old diner leads him to a shocking revelation, he's forced to confront the truth that he never saw coming. A letter, a forgotten past, and a son he never knew existed, all threatening to unravel the life he's built. What happens when a man faces the ultimate test of responsibility and love? Keep reading to find out. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Nathaniel Bishop had always been a man defined by his ability to separate his personal life from his professional one. As the head of a pharmaceutical empire, he knew the value of cold, calculated decisions. For years, his heart had been locked away behind a wall of ambition, his emotions buried deep beneath layers of business deals, profits, and losses. But that day, as he walked into the old diner on the corner of 6th and Elm Street, everything about his carefully crafted world began to shift. The diner had been closed for years, yet something pulled him there. Maybe it was the guilt gnawing at him, a feeling that he'd pushed aside ever since his wife Amanda passed away. Or maybe it was the memories, the ones of their first meeting in that very place, when he was a young man with a bright future and she, the woman who had turned his life upside down. Back then, everything had felt so simple, so full of promise. Now, it all seemed like a distant echo, a life he had left behind, along with her. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar smell of burnt coffee and greasy fries flooded his senses, and for a moment Nathaniel felt something stir inside him, a memory, a fleeting glimpse of a life he no longer recognized. He stood there for a moment, surveying the empty booths and peeling countertops. There was no one there, just the silence of a place long abandoned by time. But then his eyes landed on something, or rather, someone. A boy, no older than 12, was sitting in a wheelchair at the far end of the counter. The boy was staring directly at him, his eyes wide with an intensity that felt unnervingly familiar. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, Nathaniel couldn't look away. The boy's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Bishop," he said, his tone quiet but firm, "I need you to read this." Nathaniel felt his stomach tighten. There was something about the boy, the way he spoke, that unsettled him. The boy extended a crumpled envelope, his hands trembling slightly. Nathaniel hesitated, his mind racing. Who was this child? Why was he here? With a sense of disbelief, Nathaniel took the letter. It was heavy in his hands, the paper worn and fragile, as if it had been waiting a long time to be read. He tore it open, the words on the page leaping out at him, each sentence more impossible than the last. "Dear Nathaniel, you don't know me, but I know you. I'm your son, the one you never knew about." His breath caught in his throat as the words blurred before him. A son? Nathaniel could hardly believe it. He had been told, in no uncertain terms, that he was sterile, that he could never have children. And yet, here was this boy, offering up a truth that seemed too wild to accept. The letter went on to explain everything. It spoke of his late wife Amanda, and a time long before her death. It spoke of a mistake, a medical error, that had led Nathaniel to believe he could never father a child. And yet, against all odds, there was Gabriel, the living proof of a past Nathaniel had long buried. He looked up from the letter, his heart pounding in his chest. Gabriel was watching him, his eyes full of expectation, as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Nathaniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He couldn't even process what was happening. "I know it's hard to believe," the boy said softly, his voice tinged with both hope and resignation, "but it's true. I'm your son." Nathaniel wanted to deny it, to turn around and walk out, back into the familiar world he knew. But something about the boy's gaze, something about the raw sincerity in his words, rooted him to the spot. This wasn't a mistake, this wasn't a trick, this was real. Nathaniel's mind raced, his emotions a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and confusion. How could this be? How could his own body have betrayed him like this? And yet there was no denying it. The letter, the boy's face, the quiet certainty in his words. They all pointed to one unavoidable truth. Gabriel was his son. He swallowed hard, struggling to regain his composure. How is this possible?" he finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Gabriel's face tightened as if he had been expecting the question. "I don't know the full details, but my mother, she kept it from you. She never told you." Nathaniel clenched his fists at his sides, his mind still reeling. The idea that Amanda, his wife, the woman he had loved with all his heart, had kept this secret from him, that she had known and never told him, was almost too much to bear. Anger flared inside him, but it was quickly followed by a deep, gnawing sense of guilt. How had he failed to see this? How had he been so blind to the possibility of something so monumental? Gabriel's voice interrupted his thoughts. I need to know if you'll help me. Please." Nathaniel stared at him, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The boy's condition, the fragile, almost fragile nature of his existence, was becoming more apparent. Nathaniel's heart tightened, but there was no time to consider it. The truth had been laid bare in front of him, and now he had to face it. But as he stood there, frozen in place, another thought struck him, a cold, terrible thought. What if it was all a mistake? What if the boy wasn't really his son after all? Nathaniel glanced down at the letter in his hands once more, then back at Gabriel, who was now looking at him with those piercing eyes. And in that moment, he knew that everything was about to change. Nathaniel sat in the worn-out booth of the diner, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the letter again. The words swam in front of him, a blur of disbelief and confusion. How could this be real? The possibility that he had a child he had never known, a child he never even imagined he could have, felt like a cruel joke. His world, which had always been so meticulously ordered, had suddenly unraveled, leaving him gasping for a grip on something solid. He glanced at Gabriel, who was still sitting there in his wheelchair, watching him closely, waiting. The boy's gaze was intense, expectant. He had no idea what Nathaniel was going through, how this revelation had shaken him to the core. To Gabriel, this was a long-awaited truth, a truth he had carried with him for 12 years, in silence and in pain. "You don't have to believe me," Gabriel said quietly, his voice low, almost pleading. "But I don't have anywhere else to go. I thought maybe you could help." Nathaniel opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. What could he say? The child in front of him looked nothing like the sterile reports he'd been handed years ago, reports that had told him he couldn't father a child. But the letter that had been written so clearly, so carefully, told a completely different story. He wanted to reject it, to push it away, but something in Gabriel's eyes, something in the boy's voice, wouldn't let him. Nathaniel's thoughts spiraled. He had spent decades building an empire, calculating every move, every decision. He had always placed his career above everything else. Emotions, connections, family, those things were distractions, weaknesses that didn't belong in the boardroom. Amanda, his late wife, had known that. She had understood his drive, even if it had pulled them apart in the end. But she had also kept this secret from him, kept this child from him. The anger surged inside him again. How could she have done that? How could she have kept him in the dark about something so crucial? But then the guilt returned, sharp and relentless. What if this boy was telling the truth? What if, all these years, he had been denied the chance to be a father, and worse, to be a part of this child's life? The boy was suffering, his body wasting away from a degenerative disease that Nathaniel knew all too well. His company had made billions by providing treatments for countless ailments, yet somehow Gabriel had fallen through the cracks. A son he never knew he had, and he hadn't even cared to look. Nathaniel rubbed his temples, trying to fight back the overwhelming sense of panic. He had spent so much of his life closed off from the world, unable or unwilling to form meaningful connections. The loss of Amanda had been the final blow to any semblance of human warmth in his life. And now, here was this boy, his flesh and blood, and demanding his attention. I don't know what to say," Nathaniel managed to say after a long pause. He could feel his voice cracking, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Gabriel's face softened, the hope in his eyes dimming slightly. "I just need help," he said, almost in a whisper. My condition, it's getting worse. They don't have a cure for it, and I don't have much time." Nathaniel's heart tightened at the mention of Gabriel's condition. The boy's disease had already taken so much from him, his ability to walk, his strength, his future, and yet there was nothing Nathaniel could do to make it stop. There were treatments, yes, but they were experimental, and his company had long ago chosen profits over people, prioritizing the bottom line over the lives of those who needed help the most. Gabriel's disease wasn't profitable enough to warrant research, to make it onto the radar of the pharmaceutical giants Nathaniel had helped build. It was a tragedy, but also a choice, and Nathaniel had been complicit in that choice. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Nathaniel asked, his voice edged with frustration. "Why now? Why after all these years?" Gabriel shifted in his chair, his eyes falling to the ground. "I didn't know how to find you," he murmured. "I didn't know if you'd even want to know. But my mum, she always talked about you. She said you were a good man. I just thought, maybe I could get your help." Nathaniel's heart clenched. The boy didn't know. He didn't know the truth about his mother, about how she had kept this secret from him, about how he had failed to notice the signs of his own child's existence. The guilt came rushing back, sharper this time, more insistent. "I can't fix the past," Nathaniel said quietly, more to himself than to Gabriel. "I can't bring your mother back. I can't change what happened." Gabriel nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling between them. "I don't want you to fix the past. I just need help now, before it's too late." Nathaniel sat back, his mind spinning, his thoughts scattered. He was a businessman, a man who prided himself on knowing the right thing to do at all times. But now, facing the reality of a son he had never known, a son who was dying, he felt completely powerless. He had always been able to control everything, the markets, the company, even his own emotions. But not this boy, and certainly not the life that had been kept from him. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt a flicker of something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt since Amanda's death, something raw, something human. "Give me time to think," Nathaniel finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure this out." Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, his face a mixture of relief and resignation. Nathaniel watched him closely, seeing the fragile hope in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The boy was giving him a chance to do something he had never done before, to be a father. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel felt the weight of responsibility. As he left the diner, the letter still clutched tightly in his hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just been irrevocably changed. The days following his encounter with Gabriel were an overwhelming blur. Nathaniel had thrown himself back into work, as he always did when life demanded too much of him. His mind raced with questions, with guilt, but he buried them beneath the weight of corporate decisions and meetings that needed his attention. He had to figure out what to do, what he could do, but the answers never seemed to come. Gabriel, the boy he had never known, haunted him. In the silence of his office, Nathaniel replayed the conversation over and over in his head. He could hear Gabriel's soft voice, filled with both hope and desperation. "I just need help now, before it's too late." The boy's words stuck to him like glue, refusing to be ignored. His thoughts circled back to the letter, the one that had thrown his entire world into chaos. Gabriel's condition, the degenerative disease slowly robbing him of his health. It all felt like an unfair weight pressing down on Nathaniel's chest. He knew the science behind it. He knew the treatments, the possibilities. And yet when it came to Gabriel, his son, the man who had never hesitated to make difficult decisions in his business life, found himself paralyzed. He should help him. He had to help him, but how? Nathaniel hadn't allowed himself to care about anything outside of his company in so long that the idea of helping a child, a stranger, in so many ways, seemed absurd. It wasn't that he didn't want to. It was just that the sheer weight of responsibility felt suffocating. The boy was a stranger, a piece of his past that had been hidden from him. And his company? His company was built on profits, not on saving lives. In the face of a crisis like Gabriel's, his corporation had abandoned the idea of helping those who weren't part of the financial equation. What could Nathaniel possibly do to change all of that now? But then there was the look in Gabriel's eyes, that raw hope. It made Nathaniel feel smaller than he had ever felt in his life. The next day, Nathaniel couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach. He'd spent the morning pushing papers across his desk and meeting with executives, but it all felt empty. In a moment of weakness, he called Gabriel. The boy answered quickly, almost as if he had been waiting for the call. "Hello? It's me," Nathaniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been thinking." "About what?" Gabriel's voice had a hint of optimism, but Nathaniel could sense the quiet desperation there as well. I want to help you," Nathaniel said, each word weighed down with the gravity of what he was about to say. "But I can't do this alone. I need to talk to the medical team, the scientists, the company. If I'm going to get you the treatment you need, I'll need to pull strings." Gabriel's voice cracked with emotion. Thank you so much. I don't know if I can promise anything. It might not be enough, but I'll try," Nathaniel added, feeling a mix of relief and dread. He could already hear the disapproving voices of his board members in his mind. This wasn't how things were done in the corporate world. Risking his company's reputation and billions for the sake of one life was, in their eyes, insanity. The conversation ended, but Nathaniel couldn't shake the gnawing fear in his chest. What was he doing? Was he making a mistake? For years, his life had been about numbers, about managing risk. He hadn't made a decision out of compassion in so long that the idea of helping a dying child felt like the greatest gamble of all. The following week, Nathaniel met Gabriel at a hospital downtown, a private facility known for its cutting-edge research. Gabriel's condition had worsened since their last meeting, the boy's pale face and weak body a stark reminder of the fight he was losing. They sat together in a sterile, cold room, the walls lined with posters of research breakthroughs and medical charts. Nathaniel looked down at Gabriel, whose hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. His son. The thought still felt foreign. "Do you think this will work?" Gabriel asked, his voice soft. Nathaniel didn't know how to answer. He'd arranged for the best doctors to evaluate the boy, but even they couldn't offer any guarantees. Experimental treatments were fraught with uncertainty. The reality was that Gabriel's condition might not respond to anything they tried. But he couldn't bring himself to tell the boy that, not when hope, even if fragile, was all he had left. "I don't know," Nathaniel said, his voice low, "but I'm going to do everything I can." Gabriel's eyes brightened, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. But Nathaniel could see through the smile. The boy wasn't convinced. He knew how impossible this was. They both did. It was then that Nathaniel realized the truth he had been avoiding. This wasn't just about saving Gabriel, it was about redeeming himself, about facing the choices he had made, the ones that had led him here. For years, Nathaniel had let greed and ambition consume him, sacrificing everything for power. But now, for the first time, he saw that the true cost of those choices was standing before him in that wheelchair. The boy was his son, and Nathaniel had failed him long before he even knew who he was. Back at his office, Nathaniel stared at the reports in front of him. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had contacted his board of directors to propose redirecting a significant portion of their funds into Gabriel's treatment, but their response had been predictable. "Are you out of your mind?" Marcus, the CFO, had demanded. "This is not what we do, Nathaniel. We don't waste resources on one person, especially not on a project that has no chance of generating any return." Nathaniel had sat back, hearing the words but not really listening. He'd been in this position before, trying to make decisions that would affect lives, but always with the cold filter of profit in place. The idea of pouring money into something that wouldn't benefit the company as a whole felt like an impossible sacrifice. Yet in the back of his mind, he knew that if he didn't do this, He would lose more than just his wealth. He would lose whatever humanity he had left. "This is what I'm going to do," Nathaniel had said firmly, cutting through the opposition. "I'm using the resources we have to find a cure. I don't care if it costs us billions. This is my decision." The silence that followed in the boardroom was thick with disbelief. Nathaniel had expected resistance, but it was the first time in a long time that he had truly stood up for something he believed in, even if it meant losing everything. He had crossed a line, but this time it wasn't for the sake of profit. This time it was for Gabriel. As Nathaniel looked out over the city skyline, he felt a shift within himself, deep and profound. The road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but for the first time in years, he wasn't just thinking about the bottom line. He was thinking about the boy who had changed everything, his son. He might never be able to erase the mistakes of the past, but for the first time, he felt like he was finally making a choice that mattered. The following weeks were a blur of hospital visits, boardroom battles, and decisions that seemed to have no easy answers. Nathaniel had poured himself into finding a solution for Gabriel's condition, navigating the tightrope between the medical team's cautious optimism and the hard-nosed investors who demanded profits. Gabriel's health, meanwhile, continued to deteriorate, his once vibrant energy now replaced by frailty and exhaustion. Despite the mounting pressure, Nathaniel had become more determined than ever to help his son. The cold, calculated businessman he had once been was slowly fading away, replaced by a man who was willing to do whatever it took to save a life, even if it meant risking his entire empire. On one particularly grueling evening, Nathaniel found himself standing in the hospital room, watching as Gabriel slept in his bed. The boy looked so small in the oversized hospital gown, his breathing shallow, his body weak from the relentless disease eating away at him. Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder how many more days Gabriel had left. How much time was there before the last of his strength was gone? He had learned so much in such a short time. The medical research he'd once ignored, the treatments he had dismissed, were suddenly all he could think about. The scientists working on Gabriel's treatment had explained that it was a long shot. The chances of success were slim, but not impossible. Experimental drugs, new therapies, trials that might hold the key to slowing or even stopping Gabriel's decline. Nathaniel had given the go-ahead for all of it, pulling strings, redirecting funds, and making decisions he would have never considered before. But still, the question haunted him. Would it be enough? Gabriel stirred in his sleep, his face contorting with a grimace of pain. Nathaniel stepped closer, his heart tightening at the sight of his son's suffering. He hadn't known Gabriel for long, but already he couldn't imagine a world without him. The door to the room opened, and a nurse entered, her face lined with concern. "Mr. Bishop," she said softly, "we need to discuss some changes in Gabriel's treatment plan." Nathaniel nodded, his heart sinking. This was the moment he had feared. Every day had been a battle against time, and every time they tried to push forward, there was a new obstacle. "What's happening?" The nurse hesitated, glancing at Gabriel before speaking. "The condition is progressing faster than we anticipated. His body is responding poorly to the treatment, and the next course of action may be difficult." Nathaniel's mind reeled. Difficult. The boy was already in agony. How much more could he take? "We need your decision," the nurse said. "We can try a more aggressive approach, but the risks are higher. There are no guarantees, and the side effects could be severe." Nathaniel took a deep breath, his mind a whirlwind. For a moment, he felt like he was back in the boardroom, where every decision was about managing risk and maximizing return. But this wasn't about money. This was about a life, his son's life. He looked at Gabriel, his face peaceful now in sleep, but there was no mistaking the fragility of his existence. He couldn't let him go, not without trying everything. "Do it," Nathaniel said, his voice unwavering. "Do whatever it takes." The nurse nodded, relief in her eyes. "I'll inform the doctors." As she left the room, Nathaniel sat down in the chair beside Gabriel's bed. He took the boy's hand in his, feeling the frailty of it, the coldness. "You're not alone in this," Nathaniel whispered. though he knew Gabriel couldn't hear him. "I'm here. I'll fight for you." The next few days passed in a blur of hospital rooms, tests, and anxious waiting. Nathaniel spent hours at the hospital, reading through medical journals, meeting with specialists, and doing everything he could to push the boundaries of the research. But the more he pushed, the more the shadows of doubt crept in. His company's board had not been thrilled about his decision to focus on Gabriel's treatment, and some had even hinted that it was a mistake, a distraction from their core mission. In one particularly tense meeting, Marcus, the CFO, had told him point blank, "Nathaniel, you need to stop this. We're losing money on this project. The shareholders are getting nervous. You need to choose your son or the company." The words had stung, but Nathaniel had stood his ground. "I've made my choice." The pressure was mounting, and yet Nathaniel knew deep down that his decision was the right one. He had spent too long in a world that valued profit over people. Now, he was finally doing something that mattered. He was fighting for his son. Gabriel's condition fluctuated, his body sometimes responding to the treatment, other times rebelling against it. But despite the hardships, the boy had begun to show signs of improvement, small but meaningful. His color had returned, and his breathing, though still labored, was stronger. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, though no one dared to say the word cure. It was too early, too uncertain. But Nathaniel wasn't concerned with labels. He just wanted to see his son live. One evening, as he sat with Gabriel in the hospital, the boy opened his eyes and turned to look at him. "You're still here," Gabriel said softly, his voice hoarse. "Of course I am," Nathaniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. He had never been good at showing his feelings, but somehow, in these moments, words didn't matter. His presence, his commitment, said everything. Gabriel gave a weak smile, his eyes glinting with something Nathaniel hadn't seen in the boy before. Hope. It was fragile, like a flame that could be easily snuffed out, but it was there. I think I might actually have a chance," Gabriel whispered. Nathaniel's chest tightened as he fought back tears. He wasn't ready to get his hopes up, not yet. But in that moment, he realized something fundamental. This fight, this battle to save Gabriel, wasn't just about finding a cure. It was about something deeper, something more profound. It was about redemption for himself, for the choices he had made, and for the life he could still give to his son. He squeezed Gabriel's hand gently, the connection between them stronger than ever. "We're going to fight this together," Nathaniel said, his voice firm with determination. "And no matter what happens, you'll never be alone again." Gabriel's smile widened slightly, and for the first time since Nathaniel had met him, the boy looked at peace. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Nathaniel knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of obstacles and risks. But for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel Bishop felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't doing it alone. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the bond between Nathaniel and Gabriel grew stronger. The experimental treatments were beginning to show real signs of progress. Gabriel, though still frail, had more energy, and his once pale face was slowly regaining some color. His doctors were cautiously optimistic, but Nathaniel knew better than to get his hopes up too quickly. Every victory felt like a fragile gift, one that could be taken away at any moment. The world outside, however, was not so forgiving. The media had caught wind of Nathaniel's shift in priorities, and the coverage was relentless. Headlines screamed about the billionaire magnate who had thrown caution and billions to the wind in order to save a child. His board of directors had tried to rein him in, warning him of the long-term financial consequences of his actions. But Nathaniel had made his decision. The corporation could survive without him, but Gabriel could not. The tension with his board had reached a breaking point. One fateful morning, Nathaniel sat in the boardroom, his mind made up. Marcus, the CFO, was the first to speak. "This has gone too far, Nathaniel," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "Your obsession with this boy is threatening everything we've built. We're losing investors, our stock price is plummeting, and now you're draining resources on a pipe dream." Nathaniel's jaw tightened as he listened to the words he had heard before. The familiar voices of greed and profit echoed in his ears, but he had learned to tune them out. He stood up slowly, his gaze steady. "I've made my decision," Nathaniel said, his voice calm but unwavering. "This is no longer about profit. This is about something far more important than money. I'm redirecting all available funds to the treatment research. If the company collapses because of it, so be it, but I will not back down." The room fell into a heavy silence. His board members exchanged nervous glances, knowing that Nathaniel was no longer the man they once knew. The man who had built his empire on ruthless decisions was gone, replaced by someone who was willing to sacrifice everything for a chance at redemption. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're willing to risk it all for a child you barely know." Nathaniel met his gaze without flinching. "He's my son," he said simply, "and I'll do whatever it takes to save him." The confrontation was over, but the damage had been done. The board was in disarray, and Nathaniel knew that this would likely be the last time he would walk into that boardroom as the CEO of Bishop Pharmaceuticals. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care. Back at the hospital, Nathaniel found himself more present than ever. Gabriel had improved drastically, though there were still dark days ahead. His body was stronger, his mind sharper, and the glimmer of hope in his eyes was something Nathaniel had never imagined possible. The doctors had begun talking in terms of long-term care, and for the first time, the possibility of a future for Gabriel felt real. One afternoon, Nathaniel sat beside Gabriel in his hospital room, watching as the boy played a video game on his phone. The soft beeping of the game and the low hum of the machines in the room created a strange sense of normalcy. Gabriel glanced up at him, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think I'll ever be normal?" Gabriel asked quietly, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Nathaniel paused, unsure of how to answer. There was so much he wanted to say, but the words felt inadequate. His mind raced, thinking back to all the mistakes he had made, the years spent building an empire, the years spent ignoring the things that truly mattered. He had been a man of success, but in the end, none of that mattered if it meant sacrificing the things he had never truly understood. "I don't know," Nathaniel said after a long pause, "but I do know that no matter what happens, you'll never be alone again. I'll always be here, Gabriel. I promise." Gabriel's eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Nathaniel leaned forward, placing a hand gently on Gabriel's. "You're more than just my son," Nathaniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You've changed everything for me. You've made me see what really matters, and I will fight for you, for your future." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room felt sacred, as though the weight of the world had shifted, and they were both experiencing something they had never known before: connection, understanding, and love. Nathaniel's phone buzzed on the table next to him. He glanced at it quickly, but then set it back down without responding. The calls could wait. The emails could wait. For once, there was only one thing that mattered: Gabriel. As the sun began to set outside the hospital window, casting a golden glow over the room, Nathaniel allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that everything would be okay. Gabriel was improving. Slowly but surely. Nathaniel had given up everything for this: his reputation, his wealth, his place in the corporate world. But in return, he had found something he never thought he would have again: a purpose. And with that purpose came redemption. Months later, the media had shifted their focus. Nathaniel's decision to redirect his company's resources into experimental treatments for rare diseases became a symbol of corporate responsibility and a new way forward. His decision to stand by Gabriel had not only saved the boy's life, but had also inspired others. His company, though shaken, began to pivot its focus towards more human-centered initiatives, pushing the boundaries of what could be done to help people, not just profit. Nathaniel stood at the front of a press conference, Gabriel by his side, as reporters bombarded them with questions. The boy's condition had improved enough for him to leave the hospital, and together they made the announcement that would change the course of their lives forever. "I've spent my life making decisions based on profit," Nathaniel began, his voice steady. "But the most important decision I ever made was to choose family, to choose life. Gabriel taught me that it's never too late to make the right choice." Gabriel stood beside him, his wheelchair no longer a symbol of weakness, but of strength. He smiled up at Nathaniel, and for the first time in years, Nathaniel felt the weight of his past finally lifting. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that diner months ago, cold and distant. He was a man who had learned to love, to sacrifice, and to fight for what mattered most. As the cameras flashed, Nathaniel looked at Gabriel, his son, the boy who had changed everything. And in that moment, he knew they were going to be okay. Together, they had rewritten their story, and the future, once so uncertain, now seemed full of possibility. Let us know in the comments which part of the story was the most emotional for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And now, choose the next story you'd like to see here.